Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining this month's Teams webinar. We've got myself, Mike Whedon from Formation, Head of Sales, and I'm joined again by my main man, Mike Scott, Head of Technology. Few housekeeping rules. Please do ask any questions during the session in the chat function. We'll look to keep the session open for sort of 10-15 minutes at the end for any folks that do want to ask questions, or maybe have any, we can open up the lines and have a discussion at the end. Session is recorded. Equally, we'll send out the recording at the end of this afternoon, just so you can have reference to it to share and do what you will. Topic for today, and this was off the back of the last webinar, and for those of you who didn't manage to join that, we did one all around Teams voice, how to enable from a direct routing perspective and things to consider. If you did miss that, again, reach out. We've got the recording, and we'll be doing continual monthly sessions all around Teams. And if there are any topics that you guys are seeing, the business are asks, anything around Microsoft 365, please do ask and ping back. We'll send out feedback post the session. And we always bring up new topics that people are interested in. So please do respond and keep us in the loop on that perspective. So session today, as asked for by our customers and by people that follow us on social, etc., was all about Teams adoption and training. It's a big, big topic. And I think this comes off the back of, and Mike, welcome to the session. What have we seen, Mike, in the last, since March last year? What's happened with Teams, and what are we seeing a lot from our customers to set the scene here around sort of people unpicking where Teams have come from?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be no surprise that, UC and collaboration systems have really had a bit of a boost over the last 18 months or so. There's been a massive proliferation of deployment of Zoom and Teams and other platforms like that. But they've kind of been done in an emergency deployment fashion, so wouldn't necessarily have been deployed and delivered and rolled out to the staff in a way that probably would have been done had we not been in the sort of global emergency that we were going through at the time. So what we're finding is that, people were given a tool to use with no real training, understanding, adoption process. And really now people are sort of taking stock of that and realizing that actually we've got a tool, it's brilliant, but probably we're not getting the best out of it. So hopefully today we're going to talk about some of those aspects and what hopefully help people who have joined today to sort of understand what things they can do, what things they need to be aware of, and the best way of approaching that kind of problem.
Good. Well, so in terms of the agenda there for them, Mike, so we're gonna help you guys understand a couple of the training modules that we use around Teams. So not only when you're onboarding some of the new services like Teams Voice, also when looking at the whole M365 suite, we've got a couple of bolt-on services that we can help and advise customers on. I think strategy is a big part of it, Mike, and there's a couple of analogies that I wanted to bring to the table today that we're seeing. The university space right now is a really interesting one in that they've got this cusp of value, right? You're hearing all the time, especially at the moment in the last 18 months, kids are going to uni not necessarily thinking it's value for money. So they're changing this adoption life cycle of actually saying, rather than just going to do the 3 years, you learn your stuff and you go off into the big wide world, they're actually taking this concept of lifetime learning, where you become a student for life and you continually go back and do modules that complement your job, your role, and they're trying to get into that from a corporate company perspective as well, to add value for that lifetime student idea. And we're actually seeing that within businesses too. If you look at the costs that sort of larger organizations are having to incur from bringing on new staff, again, this idea of continued learning, we've got some great ideas there to really help that life cycle and give people layman terms learning, gives them a strategic view and a level that your business can get everyone up to, so you have a standard of understanding across the tools. If you're paying for them, get the best use out of them. The other analogy, and picking up on the game last night, and to your point, Mike, everyone, you could put those 11, or say a wider team, onto a football pitch and they could play a game of football quite amply. But without Southgate and the team really looking at the strategy of the training program, how they're going to play the game, how they're going to set up the formation, etc., it's kind of like Teams as well. It's been thrust upon us. We've all, to Microsoft kudos, been given this great platform. We can use it and people have adopted it really quickly. But Mike, is it fair to say we're probably using 25% of Teams Teams' capability, but like human brain, education is key. There's so much stuff that's not being used, and training and adoption is going to make that much better, right?
Absolutely. So yeah, it's just unlocking that extra potential that's available to it. We've solved the problem of being able to connect with each other remotely with the tools. So we're using chat, we're using video, we're doing meetings. Last webinar we talked about how we can switch on the PSTN connectivity, so how to connect it to the voice to the outside world as well. So we covered that in the last webinar. So what are the things you're using, what are the things you're not using, and you'll probably be surprised how many things you can actually do with Teams. And I'm learning constantly because there's always new things coming out. There's new ways of working within it, and each of those things, it doesn't mean that you have to use 100% of the features in order to get the benefit, but what you should probably do is come up with the basic set of features that your staff need to know how to use in order to get the best out of them and their day-to-day jobs. So yeah, sure. You need to build up that kind of strategy of what the existing staff need and how you're going to get new staff up to speed with that as well.
Good. So I think one of the main messages today for the folks that have joined is, if you are now sort of trying to unpick Teams or thinking about the policies around who shares what, who access what Teams, etc., we can absolutely, and so we've been doing for lots of customers, really set that scene, that strategy to help you build your policies around Teams moving forward. So Mike, a first piece on the theme of evergreen learning and lifetime learning. Can you talk to us about clip training? It's a really cool sort of unknown application within Teams as a service you can add on. When you talk about Teams, but also the M365 suite, Office, Exchange, etc., in a nutshell, what is Clip and how could that really help drive that adoption of Teams?
Absolutely. So Clip training, although very focused on Microsoft, and the Office, the 365 stack, it basically what it does is the training sessions are certified by Microsoft. So they've rubber stamped these. So they've actually agreed that these are the ways to use their software tools. And what it allows you to do is to build up learning paths for applications that your business uses, and then you can deliver those training modules to your staff, and they can work through those training modules so that they can get a certain level of proficiency of the tools that you use. What's great also about it is that you can actually monitor the progress of your staff. So you can actually see if someone's not doing any of the training sessions, and then you find that the quality of their work is reduced. You can set some KPIs and some targets for them to maybe complete some of that training to do it. The modules are really small, and they're sort of bite-sized learning modules, so they can be consumed in little breaks here and there. So it's actually quite easy. So you don't have to sit staff down for 4 hours of a week to complete training. You can literally just do the bite-sized training, and over time you gradually increase and gain that knowledge, and your capability as a staff member will increase as you go.
Yeah, so bespoke training course and learning paths that can be set by the company or by your provider. Someone like a Formation can help you to build that out. I think that's important around tracking progress. So when we have new starters, for example, as well as people that have been in the business for many years, it's a great way of actually getting a level of everyone to say, actually, people are proficiently trained on SharePoint, how it works, how the channels work, how to provide posts. That's really important, isn't it, for getting the adoption right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even right down to the basics, we're assuming everyone knows how to use Teams, but someone could join your business and they've never used Teams before. And you need to make sure they understand what where the chats go, and where the Teams are, and what they are, and what is a channel within Teams, and then the difference between chat messages and the threaded chats you get into Teams channels. So it's really important that you just cover those basics, so that there's a certain level of understanding of when to start a new topic within one of those channels or teams.
Yeah, sure. And the final point on Clip and why it's been beneficial for the customers that we've rolled out to is, I think it's when you it might be an unknown consideration, but things like HR budget for training, rather than it being that one-off, someone sits, like you said, in a 4-hour session, it can be that continual self-paced learning, which is really important, and you can fit it into your calendar, 5-minute slots, and it's in layman's terms. That's the important thing.
And plus you can go back to it as well. 6 months later you go, I did that thing in Excel, I can't remember how to do it. How do I, you can go back to the training module and then reassess it, and that continual learning process would go on and on. So it's not just about onboarding, it's about continual learning as well.
Yeah, good. Okay, so Clip training, guys, if anyone's interested in it, come and talk to us. You can find it in the App Store, but we can help you switch it on and really talk to you about the lifetime learning element from that. Now, Mike, Viva is something we've heard a lot about. Microsoft is spurting it in and around. Obviously, it's a new shiny product they've got. Talk to us about Viva and how training and adoption is really brought up, and what that is in a nutshell as well for folks on the call if they haven't heard of it.
Yeah, so there's a few components to Viva. It's sort of broken up into four. I won't really go through that. We could maybe save the whole of Viva for a whole nother webinar.
Yeah, of
but
course, yeah.
you know, some of the things you've got in Viva are, you know, your Viva Learning. Again, it's another tool which you can use to help you know, for training and staff. I think it's available now, Viva Insights, which you can unlock in the sidebar of Microsoft Teams. And really what that's designed to do is to sort of help staff really improve their productivity, so making time for focus time and booking regular breaks, to making sure they're not getting burnout, etc. And you know, other little things. So it's really about your digital well-being insights. So it just helps you structure your day a bit better, and you know, just be more productive because your welfare is improved.
Yeah, okay.
Mental welfare, yeah.
There was a report from Forrester that Microsoft sort of jointly did. So Forrester being a big sort of I guess consultancy firm, they look at lots of stats, etc. Microsoft they did a report around Teams, and a couple of ones I picked out. As we all know, Microsoft now at daily users up from 20 million in March 2020 to 145 million. So everyone is using this tool. It's awesome. So kudos to Microsoft. They've said actually companies using Teams, and this is for the sub 2,000 employee sort of bracket, mid-market if you call it that, they're saying that they've seen an 18% reduction in onboarding costs. And if you think about the single pane experience that Teams is trying to achieve, centralization of SSO, Active Directory, suddenly now businesses are not having to train all these staffs on multiple applications because it's trying to be driven through Teams, which is a pretty, you know, that's pretty fundamental if you add that to sort of training time, etc. The other one that was really interesting for sort of the average office staff, so people probably have that's on the session today, 4 hours per week saved of information workers around improved collaboration and knowledge share. So if we get this thing right for Teams across all of those broad spectrums and introduce the App Store, it's definitely going to help the adoption. And on that, Mike, it's all well and good talking about clip training and measuring. Reporting on Teams is also a really important thing. We introduced Clobber last month on the Teams voice side of it, so it can act as a traditional call logger. But the power of it behind the scenes, what else can it do if you looked at adding this as a bolt-on onto your Teams service, Mike? Yeah,
absolutely. So, you know, reporting on kind of your Clobber is just one of the tools you can use. And Microsoft provide some, you know, Power BI modules and things you can do to actually sort of have a look at how your staff are actually using the Office 365 stack, you know, across the different platforms, how much data do you know, how many chats, how many emails, all those sorts of things. So you can really gauge, you know, are you a very email driven business? Are you a very chat driven business? Are people actually using Teams and channels, you know, and do you have a proliferation of teams and channels that just aren't being used? So, you know, this training isn't necessarily just, an adoption is not just for end users, it's actually for the business itself and how it structures Teams and how it fits the business. So it's all well and good, you know, having rolled out all of these services, but if they're not being used, they're just dead weight and they're just cluttering things. And what a lot of people don't realize is when they roll out all these teams and channels, is actually there's a whole SharePoint infrastructure that's being built out of the back of it. And if you've not really got any control over that, or any kind of vision or any structure or any kind of governance, then it's going to get you in trouble. And the longer you wait to sort that out, it's going to get harder and harder. So, you know, a lot of this kind of adoption is really about how are you using Teams, and are you using it in the right way, and does it fit the structure of your business? So, you know, that's something we like to talk to a lot of businesses about, because we went through that process and we realized that kind of, I can't remember how many channels and teams we had, but it was way more than we actually needed, and it didn't actually fit. And we consolidated a load of teams down to actual channels within separate teams, and we kind of used the modern workplace way of doing it. And it's really improving the way we work as a business in terms of where we store information, how the flow of the documents, the life cycle of the documents. We sort of moved to you know, a sort of flat folder structure, if you like, and we're using metadata, sensitivity labels, because one of the biggest issues is oversharing, you know, sharing documentation for places that, you know, it's visible by people you don't want it to be seen. And how many people share stuff and actually know who's got access to that? It probably happens all of the time. So you've really got to be considerate of those kind of sensitivity and governance services.
Yeah, it's important, and something we talked on the last webinar, Mike, was around this modern workplace. So again, for those folks that are just joining for the first day today, if you haven't read or followed up with Microsoft's sort of key messaging, modern workplace is their go-to-market that sort of encompasses Teams, SharePoint, but 4 pillars essentially. Mike, just recap the 4 pillars and why what you just mentioned there around security sharing. That's such a fundamental part of Teams where kind of been opened up, but maybe back to that strategy is not being thought about. Can give some context to that.
Yeah, so the first piece, I think we've been talking about Teams, so let's start there, is the collaboration. So that's, messaging, sharing of documentation, all those sorts of things, voice, video, all those bits and pieces. So that's the squarely in the piece that we sit on. I've just mentioned the other pillar, which is the knowledge creation and sharing. So that's to do with how SharePoint integrates with Teams and channels, and how your documents flow across that. Then you've got security and governance. So that's, again, how you're securing the information within your business, how it flows, not just internally, but to mobile devices, people accessing it remotely. How can you be sure that, if someone's picking up something on their home computer, is not just saving it to their hard drive or onto a laptop or to a thumb drive? How do you control all of those sorts of things? So that's the security and the governance. And then you've got the business transformation, which is all about automation. I think is probably the best way of describing it. So using Power Apps, Power Automate to sort of drive repetitive business functions and just automate those, so that people who are doing regular day-to-day things can just let things happen automatically rather than having to do the manual process. Okay,
so the 4 pillars. And Mike, give some context around, you mentioned it there, but practical real-life examples. You talked about sharing files and things. Mm-hmm. I know before we went through the modern workplace transition, I had 101 channels. It was a mess. I didn't know where things were saved, who I'd sent them to, who I'm share. Real life, we live in this world of IP and sensitive information. What's a real quick win that people can use in really thinking about channel creation, for example? It really needs to be thought about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you need to think about whether you actually need to create a team specific to that purpose, or whether that team could actually indeed be a channel in another team. So, what's really important is that you structure your teams to line up with your business functions. And then if there's any overlap, etc., you consider that. One of the new features actually that's going to really help with that is channels that can actually function across multiple teams, because quite often you're like, well, it fits under this team's banner, but actually I need it to be available in the others. And hopefully by the end of the year that'll come in, and that really help a lot of businesses where you've got cross functions within the business that need to access the same sort of information that's coming. What's also quite good about that is it also works across Office 365 tenants. So if you work with businesses, suppliers, etc., regularly, customers, and you work on projects, it means you don't have to leave your tenant to sort of access shared information.
Yeah, okay. So, and a question we often get asked for people that are deploying Teams and they're thinking about this strategy part is, I guess it's that decision of whether channel creation and those rules are set centrally, or do you recommend giving individuals the chance to set the channels, and I guess setting priorities or provisions around that's really important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I would suggest that probably that's a business decision, but I would err on the side of thinking very carefully who is able to create a team and channels within that. And if you're not giving access to the end users to do that, or then the people who have abilities to sort of request access, and if you give them access to create teams and channels, you have very stringent governance about what's available within those teams and channels, what the naming convention is for those things, so people aren't, it's structured in the correct way so that actually people understand what the channel is there for, and it doesn't become a mess essentially.
Okay, so back to the training and adoption piece, and we've had teams put to us as individuals. How important, specifically when we've been doing onboarding of Teams voice services, Mike, Teams gives the individual a lot of choice and access around how they control things like their call forwarding when you're talking from a voice perspective. But when we're thinking about security awareness, part of our training modules that we've been providing, why is that important? Is it because we need to educate people on those openness of teams? How have we gone around that, and what are the key takeaways from that perspective?
I think I touched on it before. This kind of the ability to overshare is just the potential for it in teams it's so easy to do. So that's why you need to put the security and the governance in place to make sure that there are sensitivity labels on documents. You can mark them as confidential or highly confidential, meaning that you can't actually share them outside of your organization. And also you can't open those files unless you have an email address and password for someone within that organization. So even if you have the file, you can't open it. So, you should think really carefully about who can access what information, because I mentioned it right at the top of this chat that, as you've got this proliferation of teams and channels, is that it's you just don't know who has access to what in an easy fashion. So getting control of that early is really important.
But good news, that can be controlled, right?
It can be absolutely.
With the right
all those tools are available to you, and it's kind of just educating the people who manage the services, or if you've got a company coming in to help you with that, they just understand how your documents need to flow across your business, and then fit the teams and SharePoint, etc. around that.
Okay, good. And the final piece, Mike, just on the more nuances. We've had people that have rolled out Teams Voice and they've gone, oh, well, you get a dial pad, and this is particularly on Teams Voice element of training and adoption. Why is it different to a traditional PABX, and why is it important to give people that access to, say, like 2-hour drop-in sessions, really the nuances of using Teams? How have you found that? And, you've been deploying these things and hearing from the people feet on the street.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. It's quite often people say, oh, can I transfer calls in Teams? And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, it's actually does all of those basic features. They're like, oh, can I do call queues and auto attendance? And yes, absolutely, those features do exist. So I think the first step is really that education, that it will reflect 90% of the features that probably used on a PABX. So, the first thing is to understand you can do things like call transfer. But what's quite good is when you do the training for the voice in Teams, is you get some things which you may not have been used to on a PBX, such as when you go to transfer a call, because it's in Teams, you can actually send a chat message instead of calling them to say, do you want to talk to this person? So when you fire up that transfer dialog box, you've got an option really there. You can either transfer to voicemail, you can call them or you can blind transfer it, or you can just say, you know what, I'm just going to send a message to this person. So I've got so-and-so on the phone. Do you want to take it? So it's little things like that. You just get a little bit extra functionality that you wouldn't necessarily have had, because all that chat and presence is all built in there. So I should mention the presence, because that's also really important. The users have, I think Teams as a voice platform differs from traditional PBXs in the sense that before, all the features were very admin centric. So if you wanted hunt groups set up or a pickup group, you would go to the person who admin the phone system and they would program that for you. Within Teams, you have the ability to set up your delegates who can answer calls on your behalf and indeed make calls on your behalf. You can set up the pickup groups. So you want people to be able to answer your calls on your behalf. You can do that as a user. You can set your own forwards. You can set your own, diverts or twinning to your mobiles at the same time. The user has a lot of control now, rather than it being centrally controlled, because ultimately it's your productivity tool and how you want to make and receive calls or otherwise.
Yeah, sure. So it's become such a fundamental part of our daily lives. I think knowledge is power. And if we can give our users that standard across Teams, they're going to get so much functionality, especially when you start thinking about the App Store and bring in all the extra applications, integrations already exist and continue to drive. It's huge. If anyone's been onto the App Store of Microsoft Teams recently, endless application and integrations are only going to make our lives drive through this Teams front end experience. So Mike, we're at the 25-minute mark. To recap on the session, and anyone on the call, of course, if you are thinking now about how do we unpick our Teams sort of rollout that we had to do in haste at the beginning of COVID, let us come and talk to you. If you even want to, share 30 minutes, an hour, just talking through some of the strategy pieces in more detail. Clip training is a bolt-on to Microsoft Teams, which gives you bite-sized learning chunks that you can send out to all employees across your business, and you can monitor who's done what, making sure that they sit on the learning path and maybe set a basic standard for new and existing employees. Gives you a great insight to that. We have the reporting suite by Code Software, both on the Teams voice element. So it's, call it the balance sheet for your phone system, average talk time, missed calls, answers calls, all the things you'd expect from a traditional logger, but more so, and importantly, is those reports that show the usage of Teams. How many chats are going on, how many videos, who's using it, who's not. If you're investing in this tech, it's good to have insight about who's doing it and where you might need to help encourage some non-users, get involved with the super users, etc. It really brings the gamification to the usage. We talked about security awareness, Mike, of course, educating people on when they're creating Teams channels, if you give them the autonomy to do so, what that means, who they're sharing information with. We live in this very secure world. We're hearing about hacks on a daily basis. All our IP is very important to us as business. So really being aware, basic things and best practice for Teams. And then finally, as you talked about, is that giving the power back to the people, but doing it in the right controlled fashion. It's so important, and it's going to get a lot more adoption of Teams, and where we really see it extend onto the suite of Microsoft's back-end services that at front end, if that makes sense. So guys, with that, top of the hour, the session, if there's any questions, I'm just going to open up the chat bridge to see if any questions have come in during the session. We're going to keep the bridge open for the next sort of 15 minutes. We'll open up, take you all off on mute. If anyone wants to stay, ask any questions or put it into the chat window, please do. As I said, we'll be following up with feedback. We always like to see where we can improve on these sessions, and also for future topics that might be needed, or things that you're seeing your user points are using. Please do ask, because Mike and I go away. We can get the information and present topics as of when needed in the future. As I said, if you're looking at Teams, roll out for Teams Voice, any of those things, we'd love to talk to you. It's what we do. It's what we sadly get excited about, and really think we can add some value, if nothing else, information share for those folks that want it. So thank you very much. Hope the hangovers aren't too bad after the football last night. Obviously this session wasn't so stressful, but bring on Sunday, and we'll look to speak to you all soon. So Mike and I will hang on here, but thank you very much for your time, and really appreciate you taking out half an hour of your day to join us.
Yeah, thanks for joining, guys.
Mike, I don't know if you want to open up the bridge, mate. Let's see if anyone has any questions, and we'll keep manning the questions as well. Thanks very much for the feedback, guys, as well. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, if you want to put your hand up, if you want to talk, or if you're just happy putting into the chat your message, then we'll try and answer that.
Thank you, guys. Have a good afternoon. Just while we're waiting, Mike, anything on particularly for those folks hanging around, new team stuff that's coming out, anything interesting that we should be watching out for?
Oh, it's quite funny. I was talking internally to one of our colleagues, and I was talking about some of the things I'd mentioned, that come out of training sessions that people are like, oh, I didn't know that. I think one of my favorite ones is quiet time on the mobile app, and the ability to basically silence your Teams notifications and calls outside of the working hours. And I think it's a really good one. It's such a simple thing, but a lot of people don't know about it. But it means you can switch off from work. You've got the app on your phone, but actually, you don't really want to be responding to messages to sort of help you with that kind of work-life balance. So yeah, look up quiet time on your mobile app, just to make sure you're only really responding when you should be responding to chats and messages.
Yeah, so it's a great tool. I found out about it a few months back, and it really helps your evening get that, doesn't it?
Oh, completely.
World of video that we live in.
Don't forget to set it on when you go on holiday as well.
Yeah. Mike, what's been the reporting tool? What's been your biggest eye opener for people using it?
I think it's the
What's been the most surprising?
Couple of things. I don't even know where to start with that one. Actually, I think probably the obvious one is just the number of teams that have been deployed. It just gets out of hand really, really quickly, as well as, you know, just inactivity, and also people who don't make channel messages ever. So, you know, they're either sending just chat messages or one-to-one, and they're not really collaborating, I think is probably the best way of describing it. So you can actually see people who send thousands of messages, and there's people who send 25, and you're like, well, why is that? Is it because they just don't know how to use it, or they're not comfortable with it? You know, having a mechanism to be able to feed that information back to the people who deploy the application is something that everyone should really think about. I think that's quite important to get, you know, regularly check in with staff and just say, oh, I've noticed that, you know, you send mostly emails but nothing in Teams. Is there a particular reason? And they were like, well, it doesn't really work, or it's slow, or, you know, there might be a problem there, or they just don't know how to use it. They don't feel comfortable in it. They don't know who they're sharing the information with, you know, all those sorts of things. You just need to, you know, make your staff comfortable using these tools and understand how they're using it. And if they're not using it in the right way, just doing the course corrections.
Yeah, you assume that everyone knows how to use it when you live and breathe it yourself, but it's not the way, isn't it? Cool. Well, Mike, no questions have come in. So for the final folks on the call, again, thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you next month for the next round of webinar. Mike, thank you so much for your time. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye.